Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us today on a beautiful sunny day here in the south. Anyway, great to see so many people online joining us from across the UK and Ireland, and obviously it's fantastic to be here with us because obviously it gives you the opportunity to ask questions to our experts whilst we're here discussing the topics. So thank you ever so much for joining us online. My name is James Nevitz. I'm the Senior Public Access and Recreation Advisor for the MOD, and I also have the pleasure and privilege of being the ORN co-chair alongside Paddy Harrop from Forestry England. Before we kick off, a little bit of traditional housekeeping. Please mute your mics and turn off your cameras during the presentations, just to make sure we avoid distracting our contributors. The session is being recorded and will be shared after the event. A little bit more detail on that later. Definitely use the chat to get involved and ask questions throughout the presentations to make sure you capture those questions that you have in the moment. And when we reach the Q&A at the end of the presentations, please raise your digital hand if you do have a question that you'd like to ask. Also, unfortunately, in the last webinar we gave, for some reason, I think there was a Microsoft major glitch and there was a crash and we completely lost connection. So if anything like that happens, please just hold tight and Elizabeth will send you a new link so we can restart the webinar. Great. So today's session focuses on From Vision to Delivery, the freshly launched Coast to Coast National Trail. The launch of the Coast to Coast Trail last month represents major milestones for access delivery, not just in a linear, but also in a landscape scale, and the fundamental importance of successful partnership working. The trail, spanning 190 miles from St Bees in Cumbria to Robin Hood's Bay in North Yorkshire, connects 3 national parks and 1 national landscape. And it's a powerful example of success in combining access, nature, and working partnerships. We bring in this webinar in line with our ORN action plan as it nestles nicely in the areas of protecting nature and responsible access, managing climate impacts, maximising impact with limited resources, and strengthening cross-sector collaboration. If you want to explore the ORN action plan further, please access this through our website. And on the website, you can also find information about becoming a member of ORN and the benefits ORN can bring to you as well as your organisation. As well as joining in excellent events such as this, ORN gives you the opportunity for new and wider collaboration with other organisations, increase your knowledge and raise your profile across the sector. So please look online for more information. So today's webinar will give you some practical insights and transferable lessons that are relevant for trail developments, access management, large-scale landscape projects. Unfortunately, Polly Martin, Chief Exec from National Trails UK, was not able to join us this morning. Polly, we hope you get well soon, but we have some excellent speakers. So we have Hazel Thomas in the corner, you can probably see there, who's going to set the scene from us to covering the designation journey and national trail process. Then we have Angela Hobson from Yorkshire Dales National Park, Hannah Brightly from National Trails UK, and then we'll wrap up the discussion with some Q&A and hopefully finish around 12 o'clock. As I mentioned, please don't wait for the Q&A to raise your questions. If you have a burning question, please chuck it in the chat and we will monitor that throughout our presentations. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our first speaker. Hazel, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, James. And yes, hello to everyone. I did notice a few names I recognise as people were joining, so special hello to you. You know who you are. Right, so thanks, Elizabeth. Elizabeth's going to be doing the slides for me. So there is a picture here that you may see repeated. I'll leave Angela to talk a bit more about why it's such a special picture to us. It kind of represents the coast to coast version of the Channel Tunnel, so it's pretty important. And just to be picky for a moment, the full name of the National Trail is the Coast to Coast Path. So it's important to us that that's how that's reflected in kind of literature and talks, etc., etc. So yeah, very happy to be doing this presentation. Thank you for the invitation. If you could move on to the first slide, please, Elizabeth. So as James has just said, it is 190 miles, and I really have to stress approximately 190 miles from end to end. But we designated just under 200 miles as National Trail because there are two formal braids, one at Ennerdale and one in Swaledale, and stretching from St Bees to Robin Hood's Bay. We completed the establishment phase at the end of March with 3 launches across 4 days across the north of England. First at Ennerdale in the Lakes, the second at Robin Hood's Bay in the North York Moors, and finally at Reeth in the Yorkshire Dales. In delivering this, we worked with 6 partners across the route, the councils of Cumberland, Westmoreland and Furness and North Yorkshire, plus the 3 national parks, the Lake District, the Yorkshire Dales and the North York Moors. We had a budget of £5.6 million over 3.5 years, and we delivered the project on time and within budget, and we're pretty pleased about that. Next slide, please, Elizabeth, if that's okay. So a bit of background and the timeline, just so people can understand that. I mean, many of you will be aware. So Alfred Wainwright first defined and promoted the route back in 1973 in his book A Coast to Coast Walk. This is why the name for the new National Trail, we need to distinguish it from that slightly. And it's become one of the most well-known, well-loved and already well-used national trails in the world. He loved the route, but his vision was that people would follow his lead and find their own way from coast to coast. However, what inevitably happened is that an estimated 6,000 to 7,000 people a year follow his route from end to end, including, and of course, many more using stretches of it. And whilst that's brought economic benefit to many of the villages through which the route passes, it's also put a strain on the management of the route itself. In 2006, the Wainwright Society agreed to campaign for the route to become a national trail. And certainly we, from Natural England's perspective, have been lobbied many times for the coast to coast to be made a national trail. But in 2016, Rishi Sunak, the then slightly lesser known MP for Richmond, through which the trail passes, got behind the Wainwright Society's campaign and made a much more higher profile, created a much higher profile campaign, and it included sponsoring a debate in the House of Commons with MPs from across the route. Interestingly, he's reflected that it was actually a conversation with one of the businesses that he worked with in the Richmond constituency that advocated the importance of the route to their business that really got him interested in supporting this campaign. But our response at the time was, and this was a formal line to take, was that we weren't considering any new national trails until we'd completed what was then just called the England Coast Path. In 2019, the Conservative Party manifesto for what became the incoming administration specifically committed the government to delivering the coast to coast as a national trail. And it was fairly unusual for us to have a specific project highlighted in that way in a government manifesto. If we could have the next slide, please. So what did we actually do? Well, in 2021, DEFRA formally commissioned Natural England to prepare a proposal to the Secretary of State using our powers and duties under the 1949 National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act. The commission was to confirm where possible the existing walked route of the coast to coast. So it's kind of important to recognise that we weren't starting with a blank sheet of paper. The coast to coast already largely existed on the ground, and as I've already said, was already followed by thousands of visitors. But this was actually the first national trail using the 1949 legislation that Natural England had proposed, because of course England Coast Path has got a separate piece of legislation. We'd launched the Pennine Bridleway during Natural England's tenure, as it were, but we had not been requested to propose a national trail. So this was actually the first national trail that Natural England proposed under that legislation. As I've mentioned before, it was widely lobbied for by numerous parties. So the 1949 requires us to consult with local highway and planning authorities and national parks, part of the process. So we did this through what was a monthly steering group of the then 5 delivery partners. Cumbria split into Cumberland and Westmoreland and Furness over the time that we've been working on this. And we also undertook a detailed site survey of the entire route, looking at legal lines, walked routes, walked lines, desire lines, what the signage was like, what the surfacing was like, etc. The proposals were agreed between us and the delivery partners before submission to the Secretary of State in July 2022, and approval was given on the 25th of July that year and announced on the 12th of August. We could just move on to the next slide. So in parallel with the work we were doing on the route, so back in 2021, we also commissioned a piece of work from the Yorkshire Dales that was really looking at how we could explore the opportunities for the upfront development of projects to illustrate the benefits of National Trail designation. It's really about looking at the wider corridor, the special places, landscapes and communities through which the route passes. The commission to the Dales included specifically requesting information opportunities, looking at accessibility, information provision, including consideration of higher rights and those with more limited mobility and/or ambition, nature recovery, community engagement and business support. Now, the fact that we were able to include this in the formal Section 51 proposal to the Secretary of State is new. That is potentially setting a precedent for any future national trails proposals. But I'm not trying to pretend for a moment that understanding that national trails bring benefits to the corridor is new. In fact, that's reflected in the National Trail Quality Standards that go back, the current version, to 2012-2013. So we're aware of that. That isn't new. National Trails deliver with these wider benefits, but this was about the kind of upfront development of opportunities, and that was new. Could we have the next slide? Thanks, Elizabeth. Just want to talk a little bit about the complementary riders route. So the wider benefits work, and specifically, and many of you may be aware of this, a legal challenge from British Horse Society and Cycling UK has also resulted in the identification, of a complementary riders route and additional specific works beyond the route itself. This is based on a model for an existing model for a complementary riders route on the North Downs Way National Trail. So there are medium long-term ambitions to improve this route, the route that's been identified. But at the moment, we're starting with making sure that information can be provided about where there are particularly higher rights opportunities. If you look at the top little picture here on this slide, this is something that we've just developed with British Horse Society and Cycling UK, where there's a panel that can be added to finger posts with a QR code that takes users to a British Horse Society landing page that informs people about the rider's route and where it runs, where it leaves the National Trail, where it joins the National Trail, etc. This is very much in a pilot stage at the moment. It's being piloted. It will be piloted in the Yorkshire Dales. And we're also looking at this as a pilot, if you like, for understanding how this might work for giving wider information on signage. So, for example, local to local services, etc. So the ambition is that not only will there be improved access for horse riders and cyclists, but it will also be able to provide this wider information. Just quickly moving on, just wanted to talk about governance, if that's okay, Elizabeth. Thank you. So the governance of the project for the entire time. So we had quarterly programme boards with all 6 authorities and DEFRA. That was preceded each quarter by a technical working group meetings, again with all 6 authorities, sharing good practice and challenges to the programme board where they could report issues and progress. There was a specific subgroup from the technical working group looking at legal work and legal challenges. We then also had a 6-monthly external stakeholder group with a wide range of stakeholders to report progress and particularly to talk about the wider benefits project. And we produced 6 monthly newsletters that went to all of these, but also anybody literally who'd written into us over the last few years and said that they were particularly interested. So moving on to outcomes. Obviously, there's been a huge amount of work undertaken, really astonishing for the limited amount of time that we had. The picture just to the left here that says Coast to Coast Path National Trail, this was a 6-page booklet that we actually got printed for the launch events that details some of the outcomes. So I'll just run through those fairly quickly, if that's okay. Although the figures are still being confirmed. So there were over 74 pieces of legal casework and 12 miles of new access, just under half of which were bridleway. But there are still some cases outstanding. That probably won't surprise many people. They don't interfere with the navigation of the continuous route, but there are still some legal cases outstanding. We did 20 variation reports from the original approved route in order to improve the route on the ground. There are 14 miles of additional braids, 38 stiles replaced with gates, 35 plus new or replaced bridges, and over 400 new finger posts showing the acorn and the AW monogram on the top of the post, and also a huge number of waymarks. Specifically, the accessibility audit that came out of the wider benefits work that we did made a difference to on-the-ground delivery and the design guide. So even the font that we used on the finger blades and the chevron on the end that you may have seen is specifically in response to feedback from the contractors who gave us advice on making things more easily readable for people with a visual impairment. We've got 5 nature recovery projects across the route, and the current cross-route lottery funded project that's led by the Protected Landscape family and NT UK is an excellent illustration of this vision being realised in real time. The Lake District Foundation have delivered a community and business engagement strategy, which they will be presenting to the Emerging Trail Partnership, and we've supported the passport scheme and actively worked with local businesses to make sure that they are fully represented on the National Trails website. We also undertook, the picture just at the top with yet another QR code, a quick survey. This was undertaken, it was really modest survey, but was undertaken using volunteers in all 6 authority areas, giving out leaflets on a minimum of 4 days, 2 days in August and 2 in September, weekend and weekday in each month. We got 270 responses to this, and it given fantastic evidence of the economic benefit and the proportion of overseas visitors. Interesting, we got the same proportion of people were walking the whole route in one go as using part of it for a circular walk, 39% each. Over half were staying in local accommodation and all were using local food outlets. And just over 25% of visitors were from outside the UK. We also surveyed some of the volunteers who'd done this for us, and they gave us lots of positive feedback, with the vast majority of the people that they'd approached being willing to take a leaflet. We've also got data from Strava and a mobile phone data contract. These are all data sets that we're working on with our analysis colleagues. Just moving on quickly the highlights. So the highlights, and going back to the picture at the start, and Angela's going to talk more about this. One of the highlights is certainly the delivery of the largest single capital project on a national trail establishment project, which is the flagging of over 5 kilometres over 9 Standards Rig and White Mossy Hill to protect the surrounding upland peat and provide a sustainable surface for users. That was a major highlight for us all, I think. There's also, as I've mentioned, the replacement of all the signage to meet national trail quality standards, incorporating the acorn and the monogram, as I've mentioned. And the approximate midway point of the route is at Cald in the Yorkshire Dales, where it crosses the Pennine Way, which we thought was an excellent location for a marker point that was then unveiled at one of the launches. Moving on. And also one of the highlights was honestly the partnerships that we forged doing the work, working with these colleagues across the north of England, some of the best in the business, has been an absolute delight. Just moving on now, I'll just quickly, if I may, talk about, we have one significant unresolved issue, and that is the A19. So the route crosses the A19 in North Yorkshire, just to the west of Ingleby on Cliff. On both sides, the route is a bridleway, and at that location, there's also a feeder lane into a service station and also a feeder lane into Ingleby Ardcliffe itself. So there are effectively 6 lanes. In our proposal, we were very clear that our preference would be to have a bridleway bridge at the current location, but our costings and proposals didn't take account of that. At that stage, we weren't certain of what the costs could be. Moving on. So we've worked closely with DEFRA and National Highways, leading to the preparation of a technical options appraisal, which clearly sets out the preference for a bridleway bridge at a cost of 8 million. However, DEFRA have formally paused further work and are not currently seeking to bid for funds. Okay, next slide, please. So we've put in place a formal interim diversion with North Yorkshire. It does take people on what is an extra 4.5 miles at the end of what, if you're an end-to-end walker walking west to east, would already be a long day, which is clearly not ideal, but it is a safe alternative. Local businesses remain concerned about the potential diversions. So for the launch, we've shared a map on the National Trails website showing a gap in the approved route across the A19, given the serious potential risk. Okay, last couple of slides, if we can move on. So lessons learned. We're obviously now finished the project. We've got paperwork to fill in to make sure that all the claims are finished and we can finally add up the total figures, etc. But I just wanted to reflect on a few of the things that I think we're looking at in terms of lessons learned. So this is not an exhaustive list. There are possibly more things we'll add to this, but I just wanted to share. So on a positive note, the thing about the wider benefits realisation and awareness, as I stressed at the beginning, what the wider benefits in relation to national trails is not new. But the way that it has landed with being alongside the establishment of the new national trail is new. The level of awareness of the wider benefits has been quite extraordinary. And I hope that the National Trails family can really build on that. The 3 launches that we held were great for local and regional coverage. Now, this might sound a bit of a frivolous lesson learned, but there's a serious point here. Doing 3 launches across the north of England in 4 days was extremely hard work and huge fun. I'm not going to deny that. But what we got, as well as the great national coverage, was an enormous amount of local coverage and regional coverage. And it enabled each of the locations to really put in the spotlight the outstanding work they'd done. We talk a lot in Natural England about the importance of partnerships, and particularly on this work, we couldn't have done anything without the extraordinary work of the partners. So being able to give them that opportunity to really showcase what they'd achieved and make sure that we had people attend the launches that included not just the senior representatives, but project staff, volunteers, rangers, etc., was really excellent. We had over 150 guests and 20 different contributions and speakers. One of the things that we definitely need to do better is around the whole consultation, transparency and effective communication. I could talk for quite a long time about that, so I won't do, but we're very conscious of that, and we have discussed some of that with DEFRA. We really need to make sure that our stakeholders that we're working with fully understand exactly what the process is and what it is that we're trying to do and achieve better than we did. There's something about the legal underpinning of the route. Now, our ambition is clearly to have rights in perpetuity. However, practice has highlighted some genuine challenges. Caution by the authorities to use their powers in some cases, but also the length of time to resolve. I mentioned earlier that we still have some cases outstanding. There are 4 cases currently with PINs and 1 that's going to PINs. And the time that takes, notwithstanding what the resolution is a major challenge, I think, to delivery projects on this scale. The grant commitments and processes. I'm sure that you could all have comments about how Natural England could make grant giving easier and for longer periods of time. And it's always better for partners. But actually, although all the heavy lifting on that path work was certainly done by the partners, for an organisation trying to get money out of the door to multiple partners for multi-year projects, capital projects, but only having a budget confirmed 1 year at a time, sometimes not until April or May. We did some pretty heavy lifting on trying to get all the money in the right place at the right time too. And I think there's things that we can reflect on to improve that. And finally, the future for national trails, the networks, etc. As I'm sure you're aware, the launch of the Coast to Coast came hot on the tails of the launch announcement for the King Charles III England Coast Path. So what does that mean for access for national trails? What's the next big thing? And that's not just about a philosophical conversation about access, which I'm sure everybody on this call would be happy to engage in. But what does that mean for Natural England going forward? What's our role in terms of our specific roles and duties? Just 2 more quick slides. I'm sorry, I think I have run over a little. So Coast to Coast, it's a classic national trail in that it provides a well-managed, high-quality access to some of our most special landscapes as per the vision of the 1949 Act. But we've also sought to, if you like, bring it up to date with demonstrating its relevance to the current agenda through the delivery of the wider benefits project. And final slide. People who walk it love it. I have loved this work. It's been a privilege to do. I'm not sure I'm going to get an acorn tattoo.
Thank you, Hazel, so much for a fantastic overview of what's been such a positive project. I can see lots of love popping up there. Clearly such a multi-layered project, as you've highlighted there, but goodness me, I've written in big capital letters on my sheet, on time and in budget. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. What an achievement. What an achievement. So on to our second speaker, Angela Hobson. As you can see, they're project manager from Yorkshire Dales National Park. And Angela is going to focus on delivery on the ground and practical challenges. Angela, are you ready?
Hello. Right, first challenge is for me to share my slides. So fingers crossed. They should appear shortly.
There we go. Yeah.
As if by magic. Excellent.
I've got that. Yeah, brilliant. There we go. Over to you.
Well, welcome everybody. It's lovely to kind of attend this this presentation and share some of my reflections on the delivery challenges of the section that I was concerned with. Hazel is right about the photograph. It was quite funny. We selected it independently, and I will talk about why that's so important. But just to point out now, that was the last flag going in where our channel tunnel met. So we were laying the flags from each end, and that's where we met. And the rangers have never quite got over the satisfaction of only being about 5 centimetres out from our actual original measure. So it's significant for lots of reasons. Just to say, I joined the authority at the start of the project, and I have a background in landscape architecture and project management and fundraising, so I've got quite a diverse background. And James described me in his initial as an expert. That always makes me feel slightly nervous, because I feel much more like a generalist that might know enough to ask the right questions, but I'm sure you can all make your minds up about that by the end of the presentation. So just to talk about my role and my area of kind of concern with the National Coast to Coast Path National Trail, and that was in the Yorkshire Dales. So I was brought in to manage the implementation of the route. So I oversaw the legal works and also the construction and physical works of the route. And it's a very diverse landscape, so it is about 51 miles, including both. We have a braid. That one braid goes up and across the high fells and takes in the archaeological mine workings across Gunnerside, and the lower route follows the river along the valley. And I have spoken to a number of coast to coasters when they're at the point of deciding which way to go, and I have to admit tea shop seems to be quite a high priority for that decision making process, which always makes me chuckle slightly. But as you can see, it's mainly nearly all our route is within a triple SI, SAC, SPA. It's got protected species, and one of the projects that I will go and talk about is a scheduled monument as well. So we had archaeological considerations as well when we were implementing this route. Can I just apologise as well? I am absolutely full of cold, so I may stumble over my words, but I will get to the end. I just want to apologise for that. So moving on, just looking at the works in my area, we've had in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, we've had about £1.4 million of investment in the public right-of-way network. And I will say the network, obviously that investment was aimed at the coast-to-coast designated trail, but we have seen significant improvements to the trail as a whole. And I think that's a really important thing to consider as part of this National Trail Path project and wider benefits, is that the improvements to that route itself opens up new opportunities for circular routes, or to enable those that might want to do a circular route to have confidence in accessing that. We've got an additional 5,500 metres of public right-of-way, of which 1,000 metres is bridleway. You know, we've got 3.2 kilometres. This is something that I'm really proud of. 3.2 kilometres of that public right-of-way is step and stile free, and I'll talk more about that when I talk about White Mossy Hill and how we kind of considered that and developed that. Additional flagged and pitched highway service, 5 new bridges, maintenance works on a further 3 bridges, and they were stone bridges that were archaeologically important and the vernacular features in the landscape. Aggregate path, boardwalk, finger post, waymarkers. And so, you know, you can just see the scale of the project. That photograph there is actually Westmoreland Dales, and that was one of the smaller kind of elements of improvement works we did. And that was a reinstatement of a historic it was a division really between the livestock and pedestrian access, and originally it had been a pedestrian access. There'd been a couple of railway cottages just down from here, and it had gone into disrepair, and we took the opportunity to reinstate that. It's a great benefit for those users on the coast to coast walk that are walking it, but also it's just a nice little vernacular feature that we managed to reinstate and protect. And I think that you will see as a common feature through this presentation is how, as a project manager, I could best really deliver on the outcomes for the National Trail, but also how we could take the opportunity to improve and protect the landscape as a whole. So I think the theme is, it's interesting, access v landscape protection. I think it's a habitat originally in my kind of brief for this project, but I changed it to landscape. And I think I wasn't from a national park background. I came in from private sector previously here, so somebody very early on introduced me to the Sanford principle, and I have to say it was a guiding principle through the whole delivery for me. It was something that I could always go back to and reflect when I was making decisions. And, you know, I'm sure we could all have a debate separate to this about what conservation of natural beauty means, and that has been interpreted in conservation law. But for me, on this project, it really meant three things: ecology, landscape visual impact, and conservation of heritage. And kind of there was lots of decisions on this project where there was intricacies around where should the route go, should it stay on the designated line, do we need to do a variation because that would support the protection of the landscape but still enable access. And, you know, I would have those discussions with my team at Yorkshire Dales National Park, and quite often I would fall back and reflect on those discussions using this principle and consider, you know, the outcome and my decision making process. And I think it is a good checks and balance whether you're in a national park or outside a national park. You know, we're here to enable access, but we need to take, you know, dutiful consideration of the landscape that we're moving through and its features. And to kind of illustrate this principle, I'm going to talk about two projects. The first photographs that come up on screen, that's White Mossy Hill pre-works. As you can see, it was a challenge. It was renowned as a challenge. It was difficult, and I absolutely believe dangerous for the walkers that were accessing that route across that upper fell. There is a number of stories of people getting stuck, significantly stuck in the bogs up there, or difficulty navigating. Before the works were undertaken, it was managed by a braided system, but as part of the National Trail being developed, we needed to bring that braided system and have one public right of way, and therefore that would concentrate people's feet onto one line for the whole year. And what we were seeing was the routes was just becoming wider and wider, becoming braided, while people tried to make their way around these bogs. And my area ranger that I work very closely with, he runs the Spine race, and he came back from doing a run up here, and he went, "It's a bit wet." Now, you know, if he's saying it's a bit wet, it's really wet, and that includes going up to your thigh in bogwood. So we really needed to do something here, and that was identified by Natural England in their original kind of profile of works. The second project, in complete contrast, is a much smaller scale project. It's in Gunnerside, and it's around the delivery of the public right of way going across Gunnerside Gill. So the actual public right of way here linking from one side to the other is probably about 7 metres across this stone clapper bridge. But it's really important for the coast to coast path, and was originally annotated in Alfred Wainwright's pictorial guide. So two different projects, both part of the same delivery, and I think these will highlight some of the issues that we were managing. So White Mossy Hill. So it started like that, and that was us airlifting on to the fell. There was about 550 airlifts in total, and just I will come on to how we manage the lifts, but just note the similar distance between the flags and the pallets of flags. That was quite important. This was one of the photographs the rangers sent me, very excited because we were working towards each other, and this was when the diggers met, and he sent it to me and we're like, we can see each other. So they were very excited about that, and that's when the path joined. And that's the aerial, some of the stunning aerial shots. I mean, even I now look at these aerial shots and still can't quite believe the scale of this project, or the fact that we managed to deliver it in basically 18 months from kind of start to finish. And this project and element of delivery was introduced by my line manager, who I discovered since was the master of understatement. in my initial kind of induction meeting as you just need to build a path over White Mossy Hill, but he didn't give me any scale and didn't give me any measurements. So we did manage to do it, but I realise what scale and what an achievement that is for everybody. So really, I think again, this was all about that management of movement of the management of this route. The seasonal braiding was going, it was moving on to one kind of single public right of way. The public right of way wasn't established when we started on this project. It has now, and it was done via a creation agreement with the landowner, and the landowner has been incredibly supportive of this work from start to finish, which I think has been really, really important. We flagged the route from our boundary down to the route across Ney Gill, and Westmoreland Furnace did from our boundary to 9 standards. They took a different approach. They contracted out to a single contractor. We were very fortunate that we used our Rangers team to deliver all the works and subcontractors to work with us to do that. So I just wanted to make that distinction of kind of approach. So construction works, 2 financial years, which added complexity. It was a reportable project under CDM because it exceeded 500 person days. And that was taking into account all the preparation work, the storage of the flags, which I'll talk about, and the logistics, and then the completion of the work. So although we were cutting close, we took the decision that it was notifiable because we thought that was a better approach, and to enable us to kind of manage the CDM on such a large project, we worked with a fantastic consultant that really had experience in managing projects on non-traditional construction sites, and her input in the early stages of planning was really, really valuable, and I think fundamentally helped us to keep everybody safe while they were up there. And as I've said before, it's triple SI, SPA, SAC. And this was the single biggest project for us in the Dales. And I would say as Hazel said, it was the single biggest cost delivery for the whole of the National Trail path. So just talking a bit about the logistics. By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. It's one of my favourite sayings as project manager. And then I pull out my risk management folder and everybody rolls their eyes at me in the meetings, but it needs to be done. And I dragged this out when I was preparing for the email for this webinar. And this was the initial sketch that I did about where we needed to move the flags and how we got them from A to B. The amount of flags that we needed for this, we didn't get from one provider. We actually used 3 sources. There was lots of time constraints on the supplies. We had difficulty with supply. So the plan was Hartley Quarry were amazing. They let us use their quarry to kind of stockpile the flags for both us and Westmoreland. And that's where we kind of got them all stacked, checked them, made sure they were up to specification, and then from there we had to move them via road up what is not a suitable road for a heavy goods vehicle. So it was all flatbed lorry or tractor and trailer movements up to the airlift site. So that first kind of trip from the quarry to the airlift site is marked by those orange arrows. The first cross is the quarry, the second cross is the airlift site, and then they were stored at the top of Tailbridge Hill and then lifted from there in 1.6 to 1.7 ton loads. This logistics influenced our entire planning, and I think really influenced particularly how I delivered on the specifications for the contracts for the materials. So we had to break down the logistics of what we were doing, also in the context of how the materials getting supplied, where the materials getting moved to, the type of helicopter lift we required because we wanted to minimise the number of lifts. So we went with a supplier, a subcontractor that had the capability of getting the biggest helicopter in that could carry the biggest loads. I'm not techie. The Rangers would be able to give you the specifications of the helicopter. I think it was a Huey. And then breaking that down and also looking at all the risks of storage of the flags on the fell, the insurance risks, the fact that it wouldn't be behind lock and key. You know, I had negotiation with insurers, but also what ran through all the logistics for me as well was how can we minimize the movements, because we're moving these pallets onto a footpath that is a triple SI, which is very, very, you know, protected. And I didn't want to get on the fell side and then have to start moving pallets of flags around, because that would mean that, you know, there would be greater disturbance to the bog, the landscape, and potentially, you know, our vehicle movements would have to be more. So just from this simple exercise that we did right in the beginning, we could start to see some of the issues around, you know, that movement, logistics and delivery, and the remoteness of the site. And I think if anybody's considering doing a project like this, or, you know, is doing upland fell works where they're having to kind of move materials around, thinking really about where they're coming from and how you're getting them there, it's a 10-minute time, but it's time that I found really, really well spent, and highlighted some of those issues for us. And if anybody wondered how much time I spent up there, that's my car here, the blue one at the back, and I'm captured on Google Earth forevermore now. So yeah, I was up there quite a lot planning this. A picture paints 1,000 words. So obviously with this was a significant procurement for the flags. And we were dealing with suppliers that weren't necessarily used to dealing with very formal contracts. And I actually took the decision to attach this markup to the contract as an appendix. And I cannot tell you how brilliant this was, because it really made it very clear what we wanted and how we want the flags packed. And what was really important, and this comes back to thinking about the logistics early on, was I didn't want this movement of flags up and down. I didn't want the flags to be sorted. I didn't want us to have to resort the flags. So this was instructions about how the pallets of flags were stacked. And basically I wanted them stacked like a jigsaw. And each pallet was weighed, had a linear measure of the length that would cover, and was packed in that kind of upper jigsaw pattern that we wanted. So when they were flown out onto site, we knew we might have 7 meters on one flag, and we could basically unpack them. Now, I'm not saying it was a perfect system, but it dramatically improved, you know, the speed of which we could lay the flags, and also reduce the impact on the surrounding vegetation, because instead of having to go back and forth and move pallets, we could just lay in a linear fashion. Really, really important. And I know that the rangers really appreciated that reduction in handling. And that's not just about obviously the landscape, that's also about, you know, managing those health and safety risks and all those other factors that come into play with delivering a project like this. And it was great because this picture, everybody knew exactly how it's planted. And when I was having discussion with some of the suppliers about the specifications the flags delivered, everybody could see very clearly, and they could use this to hand out to the people that were packing the flags for us in their yards, and it just worked really, really well. So I think that's a really good point. You know, you have to have your contracts, you have to have all that, the procurement, but a picture can paint 1,000 words, and never ever be worried about doing a markup. I just think it's really useful for all parties. So yeah, thinking about your materials, the equipment you need, the specifications, you know, always plan to minimize landscape ecological impact from early stages, and think about how your delivery can influence that impact. And one of the things on this project that we're already conscious about was the airlifts, and we did look at loads of alternatives to airlifts, but in reality there was nothing that could protect that bog. This was the only way we were going to get the flags up there, so the decision was made that for long-term benefit we were going to undertake these works. Unique landscapes create unique solutions. So one of the things we had up here to manage was health and safety, and the route that we were laying was 2.7 kilometers long, and if you have an accident, many people will know, on that kind of environment, even if it's a sprained ankle, it can, you know, really kind of develop very quickly. So we wanted to provide some kind of emergency shelter up there, and the discussions we had about this emergency shelter, we vetoed loads of things, and then eventually I was watching some kind of YouTube video with my son about an Alaskan ice fisherman, who knew, and ice fishing tents, and they were perfect. And there we are, that's me and Michael, the ranger, unpacking. I thought he did feel a bit like Christmas. We were unpacking the first ice fishing tent that we purchased for this work, so we ended up with two, and completely different, completely looking at the problem in a very different angle. And I cannot tell you how brilliant these tents were, and they survived gales and all sorts, and were just a real practical solution for what we needed. So I think my advice from learning from this is, if you have a problem, think about it in the context of the landscape and the works that you're undertaking, and that may drive a very unique solution that really solves a problem. And in our case, it was an ice tent. So this is everybody takes the mick out of me in the office about this photograph. So this is me talking about White Mossy Hill and supplier flags and my budget when we were doing a visit on site. And I think your budget is your best guess until reality submits its corrections. And I think with this one, and I think Hazel, and I have to praise the Natural England team here, they were incredible in helping me manage the changes in the budget for White Mossy Hill. We had a supplier, then they couldn't provide us with the supplier flags, which then we had to go out for further costs, which inflated the costs, which moved the delivery from year 1 to year 2. Factor in bird nesting season. I think I must have been up to budget Z on this one. But they worked with me and they were really amazing. And then ironically, in phase 2, we based our budget on the speed that we were laying in phase 1, and we had beautiful weather. It was dry, the bog was much easier to work on, and we finished in half the time that we thought, and that saved a significant amount of money, and just shows how unpredictable really budgeting in these kind of landscapes are. So the advice I'd say to all budget managers out there, or if you're developing a budget or you're thinking about works, is, adjust your budget and keep it live. You can only use the information you've got at the time. It is the best estimate. Be realistic, acknowledge remote locations and designated landscapes, that costs can increase significantly. Thinking about those hidden costs, the survey costs, the fact that it may need to work around bird nesting season, and that may influence contractors or availability, that you may need specialists because of the environment that you're working in, and also that costs can evolve quickly, unknown costs as you go through the project that you haven't kind of anticipated before. And I think Gunnerside Clapper Bridge, the next project, is quite a good example of that. And really, I always feel, and this isn't just based on my experience here of working with Natural England, this is my experience of working with the lotteries, of working with trust funds, of managing funding streams and business planning for funding for income streams. Communicate with funders, communicate with your donors, communicate with those, and explain the changes and the challenges. And generally speaking, what I have found over my years of working in this sector, if you are upfront and honest, and you speak to them and you keep them in the loop, then most of the time they can be incredibly understanding about delays or changes in program or additional money or an underspend. So I always take the attitude that you need to be really upfront, but special thanks to Natural England in this case, and particularly Hazel, who I know helped move that money around between financial years. So moving on to the second project, which is a completely different scale project. So Gunnerside Clapper Bridge, it was a small bridge associated with Blakeford Smeltworth. That's the original illustrations. It's located in Gunnerside. It's an area of significant lead mining works, so historically very important. And Alfred Wainwright himself spoke very passionately and wrote very passionately about this area and his experience of walking through there in his pictorial guide. And I think when I approached this project, his words here, the things of the past, the heritage of our fathers have been swept away by a tide of progress that cares nothing for beauty and less for history. That was some of his words about historic environment, and they weighed heavy on my conscience when I was making decisions about this project. So there it is now. You can already see there is loss from his drawings, and that is the Clapper Bridge. Two images close up of the Clapper Bridge and some of the issues we were having with one of the revetment walls with undercutting. So as we went through this, it was scheduled monument. Well, half the bridge was in scheduled monument, and so I think Historic England quite rightly said the whole structure's is in the scheduling. And as part of these works, Historic England wanted us to do a photogrammic survey, and this is a still, but it is set up so you can rotate it a bit like a computer game, and you can take measurements of it. And we were very lucky that we had 2 staff internally that undertook this work for us. But that creates a permanent 3D record of the structure. Now, one of the issues with this structure initially when we came to it was the initial idea was to take the Clapper Bridge out and just put a standard pedestrian bridge in there, or leave it as it was. But under kind of looking into this, and this shows the complexity of how things can change very quickly, looking at the complexity, we realised it was scheduled monument, so I felt strongly that we needed to retain the structure, not just because of that, but because of the heritage and associated with the pictorial guide, but also that Historic England would want us to retain that. We looked at different options. We looked at putting a bridge, a pedestrian bridge, next to it, but then we all came to the conclusion that people would stand on that one and cross on the Clapper Bridge and take photographs from one to the other, so that wouldn't really solve a problem. And there was structural issues with the bridge itself. The Clapper stone was failing. It didn't have immediate risk, but there was definitely would be a point that it could potentially have a critical failure. And we were trying to establish this is a public right of way, and therefore the Highway Authority, although we're delegated Highway Authority, North Yorkshire Council is our main highway authority, and they would need to adopt this. So we worked very closely with their team and their structural engineer Paul as well to kind of look at resolutions for this. Through this process, it's quite interesting because the Clapper stone itself is 2 shades, and we all came up with theories, but actually we discovered that it was very integral to the site and that it was probably the hearthstone to the original smelt mill. So that even really increased the importance of retaining this structure. And that's just an example of like the actual technical drawings that were taken off this photogrammic survey. So you can see the detail of the survey that was required. This is the agreed solution, and I can say agreed because Hazel doesn't know this, but we got our scheduled monument consent back last week. We're just going through the conditions now, so we're very pleased. And what we're going to do is we're going to be putting in support structures underneath that Clapper stone. So the Clapper stone will no longer be carrying the supports or the weight-bearing load of people crossing that route, but visually it will retain the spirit, and you won't hardly the plan is that all you will see is 2 metal bars under that stone itself, and the landscape vernacular will be retained pretty much as is. And in reality, I suspect coast to coasters that walk across this bridge, unless they have some inside knowledge, will not actually notice any kind of difference within the landscape. And the Highway Authority, North Yorkshire Council, have agreed that that was the main issue for them on adoptable, and they also are keen to retain it, and they have agreed to adoption when these works are completed. So I think my learning from this one is scale and complexity doesn't always align. This project, I think, in some ways has almost been more complex than White Mossy Hill, balancing landowners. The boundary for our landowners are right down the middle of the Gunnerside Guild, both very supportive, but obviously that presents different challenges because you've got 2 landowners, 2 different timescales of how people work. There wasn't a public right of way, and we have now got that up to the point of confirming we can't confirm it until the works are done. So there was kind of lots of discussions around that and enabling other users. So we have actually also done a diversion order here to put a a new bridle weir crossing, just a bit further up. It's natural water crossing, which is great win for the wider network, because the original water crossing, which was further up the gill, was not accessible or safe. So that's another example of where we've kind of used our ability here to look at that wider benefits. And we had everything on this site: triple SIs, SPAs, SACs. Thankfully not white-clawed crayfish, although we had to undertake the surveys. We've got birds, we've got a potential dipper population, so we had to look at all the effects on that, assess that, look at when the works are going to be done, how the works were going to be done, and we had a structural engineer, and we've had a design team with a stone mason as well, and the negotiations, even though they haven't, we haven't got to that formal kind of implementation phase yet, the discussions between them about how we can manage those works and the design intricacies and water course permissions, I think has really managed to bring this project not quite to a conclusion, but almost to a conclusion. So small tasks steal time. I don't think anybody expected when we set off that this project, this element of delivery would be this complex or take up this much time. But I think between White Mossy Hill and Gunnerside, that's the two areas that I probably know like the back of my hand. I've been up to this site numerous times, and it's not the easiest one to access. The first solution isn't always the right one, and I think that's a good lesson for anybody that's kind of leading this kind of project, is that the original solution was do nothing, and I went out very quickly and realized that that wasn't going to be. And then the second solution, so keep asking the challenging questions, keep thinking about the alternatives, and then when you have all that appropriate information, make the decisions then, and really work with people and partners that might be inputting on that project. So yeah, work in partnership with us to find solutions. And North Yorkshire Council came out on site with us. Bridge engineer came out and did an inspection. We had our own structural engineer appointed as well, who's done the design work, and everybody's worked really well together, and I think that's a real bonus and shows in the outcomes for this particular stretch of the route. And I think this is a really important, White Mossy Hill is really, really important because of the scale, the improvements, the access to the route, and I think, but this quiet work is just as important. And thinking back to the Sanford principle here, again, I reflected on this. This has enabled this protection of the scheduled monument in with these funds, and I think that's just an amazing outcome, and has secured that Clapper Bridge, for generations forward, and also provided a really, really important historical record of that structure. So it's not the work that's seen, it's not the one that's produced maybe the glossy photographs. The walkers accessing that bridge won't necessarily understand the hours of work and negotiations that we've had over that. But that doesn't mean to say in this context it's not just as important. And I think as officers, it's nice to hear that sometimes, that quiet work, that consideration, that thoughtfulness is just as valuable as those spotlight projects on White Mossy Hill. And I think finally, collaboration drives better outcomes, and Hazel spoke about this. I cannot give enough praise to the people that have been involved with this project, not just the people within my team. I had 2 members that were on the Coast to Coast Path team that were supporting with the legal work, but I had the wider team, the Rangers team, park services internally, I mean, ecology, you name it. I think there isn't legal, procurement, they've all been brilliant internally, but also all those other officers that were delivering, in their areas, who've provided with me with support and guidance as I've gone through this project. There's always been somebody at the end of the phone that if I haven't done it, they might have done it, or they can give me advice on how to achieve it. And I think really building those good relationships and those relationships of trust, and that kind of network of, this isn't going right, and feeling confident to speak openly about that. And I think that's where the technical groups on this particular delivery have been really useful for project officers, has been really key to getting better outcomes. I think as a project manager, when I came in and I was seen to be asking loads of awkward questions, I think really important for me was to recognise the gaps in knowledge, particularly with White Mossy Hill, and then consider how we were going to get that knowledge set in. Is there somebody internal that can do it? Or with the Clapper Bridge, obviously our historics team were brought on board, and with White Mossy Hill, it was our consultant on CDM that helped me be principal designer on that project. And people often say, well, you know, that's expensive. It's not as expensive as getting it wrong. When I was training to be a landscape architect, one of my lecturers always used to say, bad design costs money. And I think that holds true. If you recognise there's a gap in knowledge, it'll cost more further down the line if you don't get that knowledge in early. And I think that's something that's really shown with this delivery, and something that I will definitely take on to future project delivery. Be excited about the journey. You know, some of these projects that we can work on, you know, the unpredictability of timescales of public rights of way, they can be long journeys, but you know, you kind of have to embrace that and be excited about it, and be excited about the small wins. The Rangers never fail to be quite, well, Michael in particular, who I worked with a lot, never fails to just be in awe of my excitement about a new stretch of stone pitching, which he's like, oh, you're still getting excited about these things? And I'm like, yeah, I'm still getting excited. So, and keep laughter handy. You know, I think in all the task groups, in all the interactions that we've had, all of us have been incredibly professional, but, you know, have also understood the value of actually having, you know, in those moments of crisis, while having a bit of a chuckle and you know, that kind of therapeutic value of that, and how that can bring together as a team. So I think that's really important. There's just one thing actually I want to pick up on before I kind of close my presentation, which I didn't pick up on the White Mossy Hill delivery, which I've just realised. And if I just click on this, it kind of comes to this final slide. And I meant to cover this early, so sorry. Is the specifications of this route were really important to me personally, and I know to my team, that we looked at enabling access as much as possible, and that was one of the reasons for that detailed kind of picture. We wanted to ensure that this, we ideally originally wanted it to be 1 metre wide, but due to restrictions on available materials, we couldn't get it 1 metre wide, so we went to 900 millimetres wide. And that was to enable those that may potentially be using mobility equipment to have a path width that was wide enough for that equipment to go on. And it's one of the reasons why we work so hard to make it step and stile free. So this route is 900 mil wide from the roadside up to our boundary. And again, this is a demonstration of thinking about how the income of investment in a national trail can impact your wider network as well. And Natural England very generous to allow us to look at realigning the existing footpath that runs kind of back down to the road, which isn't part of the designated trail, but realigning that onto a shooting track so that there was really good access from the roadside parking. So this means now there's a linear route that, as I say, step to stile free. It's not suitable for everybody. It's very exposed. It's still quite challenging, but I believe, and I know the team that delivered this felt quite strongly, it will enable people that would not have been able to get up onto that upland environment to experience that environment, be that because they're not confident, be that because they do need those mobility. And it was little subtle things around making sure there's kickboards and the ramps are suitable on and off the bridges. So it was a really lovely piece of work, and we're still building on that. We've got some flags left over. I think we've got about 9 flags, and I think we're going to be looking at putting in a turning point at a suitable viewpoint so that there is a point where we can go and turn round and gives that opportunity. There are passing places there, but that'll be a bit more formal of a stop point. So I think I've covered everything. Yeah, hopefully that was interested and covered everything that people wanted to hear about.
Angela, amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, congratulations on just an extraordinary project, really. And yeah, really exemplar project management. I mean, goodness me, all of such array of challenges you've had to face with those projects, and you've really captured the different scales in what you've been trying to work through as well. You know, the Clapper Bridge and Mossy Hill there. But I really like your term quiet work and highlighting the importance of how underplayed that can quite often be. Yeah, I really did like that. So thank you ever so much. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And sorry, Ajay. Oh, thank you to those who are chucking questions in the chat, and thank you to those who are answering those questions already. That's really appreciated. Do keep them coming. We are going to move on to Hannah. I appreciate we are probably going to run over a little bit, so apologies to those who do have to drop out at 12 o'clock. I want to make sure Hannah has the full time, so we are not going to be cutting off any short, but do bear in mind that the event is being recorded, so you can catch up on a thing you do have to miss at the end. Apologies for that. I've not wanted to stop anyone talking because it's been such great stuff. So Hannah, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, James. And I think I should be fine, and I'll try and aim to wrap up by 12. So great. Well, morning, everyone. My name is Hannah Brightly. I'm the Nature Recovery Programme Manager for National Trails UK, and I'm funded as part of the Protected Landscapes Partnership, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I just want to say, firstly, congratulations to Hazel, Angela, and the wider team behind the launch, the preparation and the launch of the Coast to Coast Path. It's fantastic to add another national trail to the family. And I've been asked to come along today to build on what Hazel and Angela have spoken about, to provide a bit of insight into what we're doing at NTUK with the wider National Trail Network and supporting national trails as corridors for people and nature. So a bit of context. We now have 21 national trails across the UK, 14 in England, 4 what are called long distance routes in Scotland, and 3 in Wales, spanning over 5,500 miles across the 3 nations. And NTUK is a relatively new charity. We became constituted in 2021 with our first member of staff, our chief exec, Polly, who unfortunately is ill today, so couldn't join. She came on board in 2023, but we are a very energetic and enthusiastic small team, and we've been set up by members, by the National Trails, for the National Trails. And our vision is for a network of high quality, nature-rich national trails, which are highly valued and used by everyone. And the way we do this is by strengthening the trails, so supporting what work is already being done by the trails and helping them to do more in the future, advocating on their behalf, and inspiring more people to get out there and enjoy the trails and the landscapes they go through. And as I mentioned at the start, we're fortunate to be part of a wider partnership in England, the DEFRA funded Protected Landscapes Partnership. And that's a partnership between ourselves, the National Landscapes Association, National Parks England, and Natural England. And this came off the back of the Glover Review. And we're funded to look at how we can be more than the sum of our parts individually, working with our individual members, the parks, the landscapes, and the trails. And my role is funded through this partnership, and with the wider PLP team, we're looking at how we can accelerate our common objectives on supporting nature, people, and climate. And NTUK also, through PLP funding, is hosting the Coastal Wild Belt programme, which my colleague Kate Drury runs. So I don't think I need to go into the detail of the challenge we're facing today with the biodiversity, climate, and health and well-being crises. Also, I'm sure many of you can relate to limited funding, stretched and stressed staff, across the sector, and but I wanted to focus on the opportunity that comes with thinking about multi-benefits and multi-outcomes. And that includes thinking about nature recovery along access. But what is the opportunity along the trails? As I said, it's a 5,500-mile network connecting over 1,000 protected sites for nature, crossing 41 protected landscapes, that's national parks, national landscapes, and national scenic areas in Scotland. And almost more importantly, 58% of the trails actually lie outside of protected landscapes. So thinking about how can the trails be connectors between the protected landscapes. Over 5.6 million people live within 1 kilometre, so roughly a 15-minute walk. And as Angela very eloquently put, we can't think about nature recovery, access in isolation, but also thinking about heritage, the built heritage. So over 15,000 historic buildings and sites are within 100 metres of the national trails. And a big part of thinking about this area is about connecting people with nature, but also connecting nature in its own right. And when in the nature environmental sector, we often refer to the Lawton principles, and that's looking at nature needing more spaces, bigger spaces, better quality spaces, and more joined up. And the trails really have an opportunity here, especially in terms of the connectivity piece, or delivering the joined up element, and in their capacity as linear corridors and also stepping stone habitats. And we're not the only ones thinking about this in terms of how linear infrastructure can deliver biodiversity outcomes. I'd just like to give a shout out to my colleagues who also are on our Linear Nature Network, who have been delivering work among, there's many of them, but just to name a few, the Canal and River Trust, Walk, Wheel, Cycle, and also National Highways. But for those of you who are more practically minded on the call, how do we actually do this on a practical level? Now, one of the biggest or most common questions I get asked in my work is, how wide a corridor are we talking about when you're saying a national trail corridor? So after 2.5 years in this role, I feel like there's no set width. I never tell someone a set width. It depends on many things: the habitat, budget, landowners, the outcomes desired of the project. And the beauty is, I think, that this work can be delivered at many different scales. But the first principle is thinking beyond the worn path. So what could be done in the wider highway corridor? And that depends, I know that's variable across the trails. So can any tweaks to maintenance be done in the verge habitat? Could we think about how we manage better boundary features like hedges or dry stone walls? Looking, what we like to say, beyond the fence to neighbouring land parcels. And then we shift into that landscape scale, thinking maybe 1 to 5 kilometres away from the trail. And all of this, as we all know, the trails don't own the land they cross. Public rights of way don't own the land they cross. This all needs to be done in partnership with landowners. And the fantastic thing is, we've got great examples across the network already delivering for people and nature, from peatland restoration on the Pennine Way to wildflower meadows on the Cleveland Way, hedgerow building along Offarsdyke Path, targeted species management along Yorkshire Wolds Way, and not forgetting this goes beyond just the practical tasks on the ground, but also the engagement. So I encourage you to take a look at a natural tour from the West Highland Way. And whilst I haven't got a picture here, we cannot forget about urban environments as well, which deliver additional benefits alongside just connecting people with nature and for nature. But where NTUK is looking at is how can we expand this at a strategic level? How can we look at delivering for people and nature along a whole national trail or even across the whole network? And that is, as I said, with PLP funding, it's enabled my role to support our trails, looking at supporting the existing staff and partners to deliver outcomes for nature, both now and in the future, and advocating on their behalf alongside being connectors to and for nature alongside national parks and national landscapes. So what are some of the things we've already done? We developed a National Trails Nature Recovery Toolkit to really put into words what we mean by nature recovery along a trail. Soon to be launched, we've developed a National Trails Nature Hub, a one-stop shop for nature recovery data on national trails. Showcase case studies with the Nature Recovery series, which the first featured the Pennine Way and the second the King Charles III England Coast Path in Durham. And soon we'll be filming next week on the North Downs Way with the Kent Wildlife Trust and Kent Downs National Landscape. So keep an eye out for that. And last financial year, we really started to think about that old saying, you can't manage what you don't measure. And we've worked with Plant Life over the last few months and with input from wider national trails and protected landscape staff to develop a framework to start to baseline national trail habitats to inform improved management. And again, this will shortly be being launched. Also, alongside my colleague Kate and Coastal Wildbelt Programme and funding through the PLP, last financial year we had a 70k capital funding pot that trails and trail partners could bid into to deliver test and trial projects, delivering outcomes for people and nature. And I just really love this quote from Naomi, who applied for funding and was successful for a moment in the meadow. Wildflower meadows along the Cleveland Way are vibrant spaces for both wildlife and people. Through a moment in the meadow, we're encouraging walkers to pause, take in these colourful landscapes and feel more connected to nature. We hope it not only inspires people to care for these special habitats, but also encourages more people to get out and experience our national trail. And that's what we're all about. So very apt with this conversation. What I alluded to before is about that landscape scale. We have been fortunate to work alongside wider partners and have been successful in 2 partnership bids to the National Lottery Heritage Fund Landscape Connections to receive funding for 2 projects that really involve the trail at the heart. And one of these is the Coast to Coast Nature Trail. And that, as Hazel alluded to. So this is very much, we've received funding alongside wider partners across the protected landscape family and local councils to look at a pre-development phase, so to bring in the resource needed to scope what it could look like and how to deliver an extensive wildlife-rich corridor along the Coast to Coast National Trail. And this project this initial phase will be grounded in people-centered nature recovery, structures for landscape scale delivery, and data foundations. And some of you might have seen that we've just closed recruitment for 3 roles that will be hosted, one with ourselves at NTUK, one with the Lake District, and one with the Yorkshire Dales. So keep your eyes peeled for progress on that project. And finally, when I was speaking about this we're fortunate with the Heritage Lottery funding to bring in that much needed resource to scope these projects. I'd like to end with a Maori proverb from New Zealand, where I've spent most of my life, which says, He aha te mea nui o te ao. What is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. And I think something that Hazel, Angela, and I have all summed up at the end of our presentations is that this work can't happen with the support and funding and opportunity to network between the family of staff behind the National Trails, and that's spanning from the National Trail officers to the rangers, to the public rights of way staff, to the volunteer coordinators, nature recovery officers, heritage officers. There's a huge list of people who input and are passionate about these trails, and we need to support them so that they can continue to care for these special routes, both previously, now, and into the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. That was beautifully wrapped up. And thank you for giving us a real good summary and introduction into what is an increasingly important part of trail development, trail management, and that's relevant whether you're working on a national trail or small trails, wherever they are across the country. So thank you ever so much. We are 12 on the dot, which is where we are supposed to be wrapping up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick wrap up. But what I am going to do is I'm going to assume that our three speakers might be available for the next 10-15 minutes to answer any questions for those of you who can hold on for that little bit longer. For those who can't, you've got to drop off, then as I say, this is going to be recorded and will be available to everyone who's attended. So thank you ever so much to all of our speakers, Hazel, Angela, and Hannah. Thank you so much. It's been thoroughly interesting and very inspiring. And thank you all, obviously, for attending and for contributing your questions. To those technical questions that we're not going to get around to answering, we'll see whether our speakers can provide you an answer to those questions. Can I please ask you all to complete the feedback survey, which you can access via the QR code in front of you. I think we'll be sending out a link to that as well post-event. It will only take a couple of minutes, and it is so important to help us plan for future webinars and future events. So thank you in advance for taking the time to do that. As I mentioned, the recording and resources from today's webinar will be made available next week to our members. You can access that via the ORN website. To those of you who are not members, you'll get that via an email. The recorded webinar will form part of an existing catalogue of ORN information. So if you haven't, grab a coffee, sit down and have a good explore at all our resources on the ORN website there. There's some fantastic stuff. There's a full events calendar online, which you'll find of everything that's coming up in the head of year. Do have a look. As well as your attendance, we are always looking for your input, whether that's you yourself, someone from your organisation, an acquaintance, someone who you think could contribute in some shape or form to our events. If you know of anyone, please get in touch, because it's so important to make sure we have the right people, the right experts talking about these fantastic topics. So please get in touch with Elizabeth. 2 events to take note of. We've got a wildfire and public access workshop in Bolton coming up. Booking for that closes tomorrow. That's Friday, the 1st of May. That's free spaces for our members, and the link to that will be in the chat. Then in September, we have our 2-day masterclass, 29th to the 30th of September. That's going to be held at Tibworth in Wiltshire, and the theme is responsible recreation, a hot topic. The Save the Day information will be coming out to that soon. If you're not a member, do keep an eye online. Talking of membership, if you've attended and you're not a member and you would like to become part of ORN, we're sat here ready to accept your application for membership. We are always open to organisations of all sizes. There are 3 tiers available, and as mentioned earlier on, as you can see on the screen there, not only can you attend and contribute to our excellent ORN events, but they give you an opportunity to meet and make new partnerships with the likes of the people who've contributed today and other organisations, increase your knowledge across the broad spectrum of our sector, again, as highlighted today, and raise your organisation and your own profile across the sector as well. You can promote fantastic projects like we've seen today to really highlight your achievements. And help share your experiences with other people to support their projects and perhaps inspire in projects in the future. So if you're interested in joining ORN, do want to look online, plenty of information on there. And if you want to chat about membership, reach out via Elizabeth and we can set that up for you. So thank you again to our speakers. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining. And I look forward to seeing you at a future ORN event. Thank you ever so much. Hazel, Angela, Hannah, if you don't mind, if you are available to hang about for 10, 15 minutes, we'll see if
That's
anyone.
fine.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Yep. Thank you. To Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind, get rid of that. Yeah, and if anyone is able to hang on, and you've got a question, if you'd like to raise your digital hand, and we'll put it on screen. Let's have a look. And I'll have a quick look. There
was a few questions about the handrails on the bridge.
Okay,
if
Angela,
you wanted me to just
please do.
Yeah,
if you pick that up.
handrails on the Clapper Bridge was a hotly debated issue for lots of reasons. Health and safety reasons, which is obviously the most obvious one. There's quite a drop off, particularly to the downstream sides of that Clapper Bridge, and also around the fact that it was a designated scheduled monument. Planning applications, because it would seen that it would be additional structures, not just maintenance to an existing structure. So there was lots of in-depth discussions, and it was one of the things that we discussed in depth with the Highway Authority, North Yorkshire Council, who would be adopting the structure afterwards. We went through several processes of assessment, which I kind of won't go into detail, but it's the standard kind of considerations. What is the risk? What's the likelihood of that happening? Has there been any kind of complaints by the public, stakeholders? And this Clapper Bridge has been there. It's been used for years. It's a well-known kind of turning point within the destination within the network. It is significantly away from any kind of visitor hub, so to get there you do have to be quite a confident walker, and because of that, obviously the risk kind of assessment changes along with the guidance. So eventually the decision was that because of the area it was designated, because of its visual how it is within the landscape, the scheduling, that we'd only really want to put one handrail on there, and actually the preference was from historically that we didn't put any handrails on there. And after discussions and looking at the main risks of that structure, we felt that was suitable. Now again, that was an individual assessment for that Clapper Stone and that Clapper Bridge, and it's something that we are going to we've got a number of sites kind of listed for more regular inspections or kind of closer monitoring, and there's 2 sites in very close proximity up there that are down for that. So that is something that we are going to be monitoring and kind of just paying attention to as it goes forward. But there has been no instance on that Clapper Stone to date, touch wood. It's like, and we felt confident that due to the location, that the risk management with the structural integrity would manage the risks associated with those crossing at that point, and that was the assessment made. And as I said, the Highway Authority was very key in kind of undertaking that, because it's a crossing over natural watercourse, so they will assume responsibility of it when it's adopted as part of the highway. So yeah, we did have long debates about handrails, which is quite interesting to be part of. Hopefully that answers kind of those queries.
I think so. That feels like a pretty comprehensive answer. Thank you. Pete, I can see your hand.
Thank you. Question to Hazel. Obviously, the riders route, which provides an alternative route for cyclists and horse riders, is something that we kind of piloted a few years back with, again, in partnership with Cycling UK and British Horse Society. But we haven't really got any further because the braided routes on the national trail, so it makes it difficult for us to put our Natural England funding into those routes. As far as our local authorities are concerned, those routes are, up to standard for statutory duty. But we'd probably like to improve them, because those bridleways tend to be wider, a little bit flatter, and they're really good for wheeled users as well, for people using mobility equipment. So just wondered what the long-term development plan was for the braided routes to have multi-user routes travelling within the corridor, if not on the definitive line.
Right. So yeah, of course, like the North Downs Way, the riders route for the coast to coast weaves in and out of the legitimate bridleway parts of the coast to coast, and then goes into using the wider network. There are medium to longer term plans to change the kind of riders route that's currently drafted, as improvements are able to take place. So in terms of what the riders route will look like, but just to stress, all of the partner authorities have been really supportive of the development of the riders route. And even though, particularly like in the lakes, it currently takes a completely different route from the coast to coast, but yet the Lake District have committed some resources to making some of the improvements that have been recommended. So in terms of actually getting it in place in the first place, there is what Kieran Foster, who some of you will know, calls his B- route at the moment, i.e. It's nowhere near what he would aspire for it to be, but it is in theory a continuous route. And there have been some improvements done alongside the creation of the coast to coast itself. So the first question is, in a sense, is when is that going to reach a point at which it is a route that is deemed to be truly satisfactory for its purpose, and that is going to take. British Horse Society and Cycling UK acknowledge that is going to take a little while. In terms of and sorry, just to leap off to the side slightly, which is why what we're focusing on at the moment is at least providing information on where it is in reasonably good order, and the links are in good order, and it's providing links to local service centres, etc., which is what the piloted information provision is about. Now, one of the reasons why, Pete, as well as I do, how the funding formula works and how the funding for maintenance works, and the emphasis is that the maintenance support is given for keeping the National Trail bring up to quality standards, but it's also recognises that sometimes in order to deliver the wider vision of national trails, that if appropriate, then works can be looked at within the sort of wider corridor, but only so long as it doesn't divert funding from keeping the National Trail up to quality standards. I don't have a crystal ball in terms of what those budget support changes to the funding formula might mean. But in theory, that's why I wanted to emphasise the importance of the wider benefits conversation that we've had. This has really landed well. Now that doesn't mean that that's suddenly going to resolve the public sector funding crisis, but it's really landed well with understanding that those wider sort of accessible routes encourage greater inclusion and all the rest of it, ticking all that agenda. So I don't have an easy answer for the sort of long-term maintenance support of the complementary route, but I think that there are opportunities for that conversation to demonstrate those benefits that hey, I'm always a glass half full kind of person. You know, I certainly hope that we're able to make those arguments. Does that help at all?
Yeah. Obviously, we did that a few years ago, and I'm now looking at how we can further develop it. It's kind of sitting there a little bit dormant. It's probably not even a B minus in Kieran's eyes. It's possibly a C or a D, but it's there. And if people do use it, you look on Strava and Commute and things, people do use it. It's where do we take it next? How do we get the funding to make that next step forward? How do we fit it in with all the nature recovery and access work that DEFRA want us to be doing as well?
Yeah, no,
Thank
I
you for
agree, and
that.
that's why I think it's part of that bigger conversation about what do we want to be focusing on as a sector in terms of the wider network going forwards. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks everybody for your contributions. It's been really interesting.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it. I've not seen any other hands pop up. So I think unless I get one in the next 10-15 seconds, rather than pick through the questions that are being posed in the chats, because that sort of implies I'm going to go through every single one, and we certainly don't have time for that. I think we'll call it a day. And yeah, thank you all for attending. Elizabeth's posted a fresh link. I understand the link wasn't working, so do leave your feedback through that, please. It'd be greatly appreciated. So enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your week, enjoy the bank holiday weekend, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you at another ORN event. Thank you ever so much.